Welcome to The Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. Without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. Today's guest is me. I'll be honoring my grandmother who died on August 15th, 2025. This podcast will air on Friday, January 2nd, which is one day before her birthday on January 3rd. This will be our first birthday without her. I want to use this space to share about our relationship, her journey, and my journey as a caregiver. Over the past year, I've been living all the lessons that we talk about on this podcast. And even having this podcast, unfortunately, doesn't make the roles and responsibilities, the logistics, and the emotions of losing someone any easier. I actually may have put too much pressure on myself to be perfect because I have a podcast like this. Throughout the last, year plus, I've embarked on new challenges, learned new lessons, experienced new types of financial turmoil, new types of grief. But overall, it's inspired me to continue to inspire you, our listeners, and the Currency of Grief family to have these ever so important conversations, and for all of us to know, if we're going through something like this, to know that we're not alone. So this will be my first solo episode. Please take it easy on me. So who is Grandy B? First, her name was Barbara, but to me, she will always be Grandy B. So that's what I'm going to be referring to her as on this podcast. I was born in 1996. My grandparents had two sons, my dad and my uncle. My grandfather and Grandy B got divorced in the 80s when my dad and uncle were teenagers. And subsequently, Grandy B began dating and eventually married a woman named Danny. So to me, they were always Grandy B and Grandy Danny. Grandy B was a big golfer, bowler, and tennis player. She's where I get all of my athletic abilities from, I'm pretty sure. I remember one time Grandy B came and played in a charity golf tournament with me, and the men had to keep moving back, but she got to hit from the front tees. And so when we were playing from a 600-yard par five, she'd be on the front tees, 200 yards in front of us, hit the ball straight down the middle, and she would make any putt within 10 feet. So we called her Money Barb. Money Barb. I love it. She will always be Money Barb, and I'm going to channel her on the golf course anytime I can. Another fun story is the Grandparents' Day story. So every year in elementary school, we'd have Grandparents' Day at the school. Every class that I was in, as I got older and older, each year I'd still have the big table in the back. Why? Well, I had 6 grandparents every Grandparents' Day, 4 women and 2 males. And the funny part was that all my classmates would be looking at our family and being like, who the hell are all these people? Like, how are they all your grandparents? And I was like, I didn't really care. I just love the attention. I love having 6 grandparents at Grandparents' Day every single year to come and support me and to show my classwork and my art projects and, whatever I was learning in social studies. So Grandparents' Day was definitely a highlight of my childhood. I fully believe Grandy B and Danny were pioneers of their age. I couldn't imagine how hard it was to come out in the 80s. And this will be a recurring theme, but I think she never felt fully accepted by her family and her community. She was, I guess before her time. With that being said, she was filled with love and care. She loved her grandchildren. Both her and Granny Danny were always proud of us, no matter even if it was the smallest task, or we graduated school or got an A on a test, or, hit a ball straight on the golf course. They were always proud of us. Every time I called her, um, she would want to stay on the phone as long as possible. And I'm convinced that she only watched Gators and Dolphins games just so that she could call me and talk about them with me. The other funny story about both Granny B and Danny were that they were by far the slowest eaters. They would get a salad and, everybody else would be done 20 minutes in, and they'd be maybe halfway through and then take it home later. I think that came from just really wanting to cherish the moments and spending time with the people. Also, my grandma had an eating disorder, and they were both always super skinny. But, I think I'm going to spin it as just enjoying spending the time with people. They wanted to eat slow and savor those meals, savor those moments with the people that they loved and care about and wanted to spend their time with. And they loved their grandchildren almost as much as they loved each other. Barbara and Danny were inseparable, to the point where they actually ended up dying 6 weeks apart. They didn't know life without each other. And if that's not love, I don't know what is. So the lead up. When I was born, Granny B and Danny lived in Carmel, California together, but they moved back to Florida in the early 2000s. They moved about an hour north of me. So they weren't, next door neighbors. They weren't babysitting me on a weekly basis, but they would come to big events. They would come to my baseball games. They would come to Grandparents' Day. They would come play golf. They would love to, come play golf with my dad and I, or we would go up there, and they would take us out to lunch as well. That's where I get the slow eating stories. We used to have a really big Christmas party together every year throughout my childhood, and that tradition introduced me to a whole new family. It was Danny's side of the family, and I always considered them an extension of my family. They loved seeing us, and they loved their community of friends. So, they would come down and see us and bring everyone together and go back up to Hope Sound and Stewart and Hutchinson Island to be with their friends and their community where they felt accepted. So fast forward a few years to 2012. My dad was Granny B and Danny's financial advisor. So he was managing their money. And my dad, my brother, and I went up to their house for lunch one day because Granny B had a procedure. So we wanted to go in and check in on them. And that visit ended up being short lived. All I remember really was a massive argument about an accusation about my dad mismanaging their money. Minutes of yelling, shouting, and some choice words, and a silent car ride home. It's a moment in time that will forever scar my brother and I, being, I was 15 years old and my brother was 5 years old. And it also unfortunately changed our relationship forever. After a few years of not seeing them, my dad tried to mend their relationship in 2015, 3 years before he passed away. I remember meeting Granny Barbara halfway for lunch or dinner. I think I had, just graduated a grade or played in a baseball game or something like that. And so, he was trying to mend their relationship and brought me with him to dinner with her. And, this is the first time I'd seen her in 3 years. And it was really challenging for both of them. But I think he wanted he wanted to mend the relationship because he wanted Granny B to be part of our life and for us to be part of Granny B's life. He wanted his mom back in his life and that person that raised him and supported him. Unfortunately, we know how this story continues, and my dad died 3 years later, so in 2018, after a number of years of not speaking to his mom. And that was really hard for everybody, obviously, but including Granny B. It was hard to know that she had lost out on time with her son and hadn't completely mended their relationship before he passed. And after I found a letter that she journaled about how hard it was to bury his son, I couldn't imagine going through anything like that. Since my dad's death, Granny B would call me, monthly or every other month. She would always tell me how proud she was of me and Jake. It was truly one of my biggest cheerleaders throughout high school, throughout college, and into my adult working world. In 2024, we found out that Granny Danny was diagnosed with dementia. This was the beginning of 2024, so in January. And Granny B was her main caregiver. And for those of you who know the path of dementia, it's not a fun one, not an easy one. In May of 2024, I made the decision to leave New York City and come back down to Florida to be closer to my family, to my brother, to my mom, to my stepmom and stepsisters, and also my grandparents, because I saw the writing on the wall for all of them. And I knew we only have so much time left, and time is our most valuable asset. In July of 2024, Granny B fell and hit her head in a parking lot entering a restaurant. And we believe that she may have had a mini stroke while walking into the restaurant, and that's what caused the fall and the damage to her head. Fortunately, she was able to walk, talk, and speak again, but we think that caused some lingering effects. I started asking her some challenging questions. So I asked if being at home without care was best for them. And I asked permission to start looking at nursing homes with them for them. And so I put a list together. I did some research. My mom helped me. And I went up 3 different times during, the early fall of 2024 to tour some different nursing homes. And honestly, we had a lot of fun. It was fun to be out and about, getting them into the car, meeting people, having conversations, learning about them. We were filling out applications. And they were asking, what did you do for work? What was your career? What was your highest degree? All of that stuff. And it was nice to recount and recap stories. Trying to find a nursing home felt like the 3 little piggies. So it was like, this room is too small in this nursing home. The food isn't good in this one. Maybe this one is just right. But it never ended up being just right. I thought there was one with like a pool and an ice cream bar and a putting green in the back. And I was like, this one's going to be awesome, Grandma. And I pitched it as summer camp for old people. But they didn't want to leave our home, and they didn't want to leave each other. Granny B was worried that she wouldn't be able to see Danny if Danny was in a memory care unit. And so they decided that, assisted living nursing home was not for them. So they ended up finding 2 amazing aides, Chloe and Anne, through a local service. And yeah, unfortunately, none of the work that I did finding nursing homes ended up paying off, but it was a worthwhile experience that we experienced together, which is really nice. I kept, visiting them and going up. And during those 3 visits and afterwards, I tried to get my grandmother to have the conversations about what type of care she wanted, how she wanted her affairs managed. Did she want me to play a role in those affairs? Where were the important documents? And all she really said was, we have a team, everything's handled, and she didn't want the family to fight. She wanted harmony and peace. It was hard for her to open up about end of life and planning for, unfortunately, the inevitable. It was hard for her and my dad to recognize their own mortality. I kept visiting and visited at least once a month, if not more frequently, in the spring of 2025. During those visits, I helped her open her mail and I talked through things that needed to get done around the house. And um, I would take her on wheelchair walks. So at this point, she was getting less mobile, and had a couple more hospital visits. And she began to be confined to a wheelchair. And so I would wheel her around. She really always wanted to go outside. She wanted to eat outside. She wanted to drink her vodka tonics outside, even if it was noon. It was 5 o'clock somewhere, so we were drinking vodka tonics outside. And she wanted. We were able to spend some time on walks, and you know, it was hard for her to get a lot of words out, but we would have conversations about the houses, about life, um, about Danny, and about the things that I was working on, including this podcast. And unfortunately, they were both getting skinnier. She was getting skinnier and was less and less able to take care of themselves. And it was evident that both of them were declining. And the irony was, when one had a setback, the other wasn't far behind, which was a tribute to how inseparable they truly were. On Monday, June 9th, I was in the airport about to hop on a flight to a 2-day work trip before a 10-day trip to Portugal. I'm going to, if I had an assistant, I would have some questions about that schedule, but it was all me and it was jam packed as it typically is. But, I was about to embark on basically a 14-day trip, and I got a call from my uncle and my grandmother's attorney, who I really hadn't met before. And they both let me know that my grandmother was declining, which was evident, but that I had been named in the first seat, or the primary medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney, executor of her estate, and trustee of her trust. That hit me like a ton of bricks. Yes, I started this podcast last year. I've been, a personal representative of my dad's estate before, but still, in the context of my grandmother, what does this mean? Why am I finding out about this right now? Why didn't Grandy B tell me? I had spent so much time with her. And at this point, her health had declined so much that other family members wanted to have her deemed incapacitated to activate the power of attorney powers and allow us to make medical and financial decisions on her behalf, to pay bills that hadn't been paid and were overdue, to you know be notified when they were going to the hospital. They were in and out of the hospital, and for the most part, the family was shut out because they had held so much, all the visits to the hospital to their chest. They didn't want anybody to worry about them. They were always independent. All we wanted to do was know what was going on. So we could care for them. But one of the qualities that they had was they always held their cards, their feelings, their emotions, and those events close to their chests. And I think it was because she had been judged in so many aspects of her life and just didn't want to be judged and didn't want anybody to worry about her. So when I got home from Portugal, I went to see Grandy B with my uncle and Grandy B's sister, and she struggled to speak. It was quite overwhelming with 3 people in the room by her side, knowing that the end was near, the writing was on her face, and we were concerned, but we also wanted to, find joy and give her the space to talk if she could. And we tried to have conversations around funeral arrangements, but unfortunately, she couldn't really articulate what she wanted. She had a stroke and also had a aphasia, which, her brain and her mouth and her vocal cords just weren't moving in the same capacity. And it's really hard to see someone who, for the majority of my life was so full of life and energy and would talk so highly and positively, just struggle to have words come out of her mouth. And each of us had unanswered questions about her wishes, about her estate plans, about what to do with family heirlooms and jewelry, and where were they, and about why and what she wanted. And unfortunately, it was too late to get the true answers. And we, make up stories and thoughts about what she would have wanted, and tried to get her to talk about it as much as possible. So on that Monday, 2 days later, the doctor came over and evaluated her and officially deemed her incapacitated, which means she was unable to make her own decisions. Later that day, we had hospice come over to add in more comfort in her care, knowing that her time was near, whether it was 6 weeks or 6 months, the end was in sight. And I learned a lot about hospice during this time. Hospice is really for comfort, knowing that, there's not much else you can do, and how can we make her last days, weeks, months as comfortable as possible. For Danny, she had gone to the hospital that weekend and was struggling to breathe and she was getting oxygen. Through all of her evaluations, it was evident that Granny B really just wanted to be with Danny. And 2 days later, I went back up to see both of them, and Danny was bedridden and struggling to breathe even more so at that time. And I sort of, not knowing the future, said goodbye and told her that I loved her to Danny. And although she had barely opened her eyes, that entire day since she'd been back from the hospital, she opened her eyes and gave me a look that I knew. I knew she said she loved me and she wanted me to care for Granny B. And she always, before this, said she was proud of me and that, quote unquote, I was such a good guy. And so that's something that I'm going to take with me, was, that final look, her waking up to me, and to the touch of her hand, and, knowing that such a good guy, and I'm going to take that and live into that for the rest of my life. It's a lot. The next week, I met with Barbara and Danny's estate attorneys, who signed me into the role as Barbara's trustee. They explained the trust and how the distributions worked. And they had reciprocal trust with each reading the same thing and naming the same beneficiary. So 2 separate trusts, Grandy B's trust, Danny's trust, and they basically read the exact same thing in the exact same way, besides who was trustee. Distributions were all the same. And they each named 18 beneficiaries. So all the kids, all the grandkids, and 5 charities with a shares of 110, not 100. So you got to like do the math between that. And at that point, I knew with so many stakeholders, so many opinions, so many emotions, and everything that involved in this, I knew this was going to be complicated. I also spoke with her financial advisor, who I had played golf with, Grandy B, Danny, and her financial advisor, and met him and had a relationship. So he gave me access to view all the accounts, to view the trust that I was now a trustee for. And I started tracking down her bills and creating a balance sheet of her and their assets so that I would understand what was going on. And there was one, late work night that I was just, on Excel, organizing everything, putting things together, and just trying to get organized for the tasks or the responsibility that I had undertaken. The next few weeks, I would visit Granny B 2 to 3 times per week. Basically, I worked out of her home office during those days, and it was really stressful. And it was obvious, it was evident that Granny B was really sad and missed Danny. Danny had died, the day after I said my goodbye to her. And yeah, that was her true love, the person that she loved the most, and that person was no longer there in her house with her. And so it was stressful to drive up in the morning. I found a gym locally that I worked out at one time in Stewart. I worked out on ClassPass. I left at 6:00, got there at 7, worked out from 7 to 8. Got to the house by 8:30, showered, logged into my computer by 9, started working, and had breakfast and lunch with my grandmother. We watched some tennis in the afternoon, and then I would drive back and try to miss the rush hour traffic of South Florida. On top of that, I had a golf trip in July, which was nice because it took my mind off of everything. I moved apartments, which was not nice. It was super stressful. And I was getting ready to be the program director at experience camps. And when camp rolled around, I was truly burnt out. It actually gave me energy to be in a different environment and forget about my life at home. But going into, such a personable, high energy, high stress environment as my role in experience camps, it, wiped me out. But it was also a really special community to share the challenges that I had been facing and to pre-grieve Grandy B. I spoke in a sharing circle one night about my grandmother, about what I had been going through. And I just felt really heard and I felt like nobody truly got it, but people, got it. It was nice to feel supported. But caregiving overall consumed me. I struggled to balance it all with the emotional, the personal, the financial, and all the logistics around it. The way I coped was that I talked about it a lot. I talked about it with some clients. I talked about it on this podcast with some of our guests. I talked about it, if I was golfing with people would ask me, how are you? And I'd be like, well, here's what's going on. And they were like, oh, yeah, I didn't ask for all of this. There were times that I went to a dark place and I thought, would it be better if she weren't here anymore?
but I love her, and I didn't want that to be real. And I tried to, push that away as much as possible. I relied on my family, my friends, my girlfriend for support. There was during the golf trip, my brother visited her and, took over my caregiver responsibilities so I can go freely go on the golf trip and not have to think about everything going on at home. My girlfriend came up with me numerous times and was just so caring, both to me and also my grandmother. We would, play with her hair and watch tennis and hang out. And she was just so helpful. And I'm appreciative to have her by my side for those hour-long car rides there and back to go visit her. And I was grateful that I didn't have to do it all by myself. Having a team, having outlets, knowing what those outlets are and actually utilizing them and asking for help is so, 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 so important. So after experience camps in August, I visited Grandy B after camp and told her all about it. And I had a huge smile on my face, and she was, evidently incredibly proud. Unfortunately, it was also evident that she was still declining. She was not moving in the positive direction. I was really appreciative that she held on while I was at camp so I could live out my time at camp and didn't have to leave early. And I was grateful that I got to tell her about it. But that following week, I started coordinating with the funeral home, just in case. And, when they started asking about her wishes, I was never confident when I was like, yeah, she wanted to be cremated because we never knew for sure. She nodded her head when we asked questions, but it was never written down or documented exactly what she wanted. When Danny died, we decided that both of them would have wanted to be together and wanted to be cremated together and have their ashes spread together. So that's the way we honored them. Danny's family decided to wait to have a funeral or a service for Danny until Barbara had passed so that they could be together. On August 15th, 2025, Grandy B died at home with one of her aides who loved her very dearly by her side. I was actually in a meeting when I got the call. There's a fine line between living my life and caring for her 24/7, and I really think she would have wanted me to live my life and do my job. Unfortunately, the friend that I was in a meeting with, I let him know, hey, if I get a call, it's not good news. And I ended up getting a call during that meeting, and of course it was not good news. So I said, hey, this just happened. My grandma just died. I have to go. I immediately called my girlfriend. I called my stepmom and picked them up, and we drove up to her house to, you know, be there. I never really knew what happens next, but, we called the funeral home. They, I guess, ordered some people to come pick up her body, and they brought a gurney. They were in full suits, and it was like super awkward. They came in, and I felt like they were from Men in Black or something like that. They were in full suits, and they wheeled in this stretcher gurney and took her out, and they were like, do you want a couple minutes with her? And I was like, I don't know, like, this doesn't feel like her. But we took those couple minutes, took some deep breaths, and ironically during those minutes my grandma has an Amazon Echo or something like that, and we were playing music on the Echo, and all of a sudden she all of a sudden the song that knocking on heaven's door comes on. So as we were saying goodbye, it was knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. And it was we all started, smiling and laughing when we realized it, because how ironic is it? What are the odds that that song comes on as they're wheeling her out? So as soon as, they had taken her away, we delved into tasks around the house, throwing out the food in the refrigerator and the pantry, changing some of the locks, securing the house now that no one was home, throwing out some other items that would have gone bad. And then my girlfriend, stepmom, and I went to the funeral home to process the cremation, pick out an urn, and order a death certificate. And that, I thought that was going to be, like a 20-30 minute process. It ended up being an hour and a half process. All in all, it was a really long day. We probably could have waited to go to the funeral home, but we wanted to get it out of the way because she does live an hour away. And so it was nice in hindsight to knock it out, but that day was really, really long. Pause for water break. So on our drive back, my uncle asked me to send him all of her estate documents so he could start helping with the administration. I felt like it was really quick to start thinking about all the logistics a few hours after she had died, after such a long day. It's like, hey, we just need a break. So 2 days later, I found out that my uncle had found out and was very upset based on the discrepancy of the distributions in my grandmother's trust. Found out he was blaming me for what she had put in her documents. And in reality, it ended up being evident that, this was something between him and his mom. We found out a couple months later that Grandy B had taken both my uncle and my dad out of her estate plan after the falling out in 2012. And she ended up adding them back in 2017, but at smaller percentages. And this caused a lot of turmoil and a lot of tense conversations between my uncle and me. We had a lot of heart-to-heart conversations, in-person conversations, and eventually even scheduled a joint therapy session to talk about the thoughts and the feelings around it, which ended up in hugs, apology, and being able to move forward with navigating what's to come. During these times, it's so important to separate the financial from the emotional, or the emotions of loss, and the challenging relationships that somebody may have with the person who's no longer here. You have to, put your emotions on the shelf. And if you're navigating something financial, just, look at it objectively. And a lot of times it's really hard because money is so emotional. There's a direct tie between money and, the money that's left to you, and like, did that person love me? What did that person think of me? Oh, I'm written in a lesser portion of their estate. Did they not love me? Did they not care about me? And if someone can't make that separation or distinction, they may need to step away from handling the financial and the logistical items, or else, it may make things harder for everyone. And that's what happened to us for a certain period of time. It's really unfortunate that we didn't have the conversations with Granny B as to why she made those changes. It added an element of extra grief on top of grief. For me, it was, why am I the fall guy? Why am I being blamed? Why couldn't she have handled this or had a conversation or talked through this? Why couldn't you solve this before dumping it in my lap, our laps? Why couldn't, you know, yeah. And so it really casted a shadow on her legacy and and her imperfections. But it just goes to show that none of us are perfect. We're all just doing the best that we can. All my uncle and I wanted was it to be fair, equal, and transparent. And unfortunately, the person that had all the answers is no longer here, and we didn't have the conversations with her. So, purpose of the podcast, have those conversations. One of the nuances that came up was an irrevocable life insurance trust from the 1980s. So my grandmother had created an irrevocable life insurance trust for estate tax purposes back in the 80s when estate taxes were a lot lower than they are now. And so, or the estate tax threshold, I should say, the threshold that you have to start paying estate taxes when somebody died. And she put a life insurance policy in there. So what happened is that when it's an irrevocable life insurance trust, you're not able to change the beneficiaries because it's an irrevocable trust. You can't change it. You can't change the beneficiaries on the policy. So the ILIT, Irrevocable Life Insurance Trust, should be named as the owner and the beneficiary of the policy in order to fully move it out of your estate. And so in 2013 and 2021, we found out that my grandmother and Danny had changed the beneficiaries on the policy, which was not allowed. And so we ended up, Mass Mutual ruled that those changes were not allowed, even though they had accepted the changes during those years. And it ended up being evident that my uncle was the beneficiary and, ended up getting his fair share from a monetary standpoint through the policy. So that was a good thing, and I wanted that to happen. The next task was choosing an attorney. So estate attorneys either charge a flat fee based on the project or an hourly fee based on billable hours for the project. So how much they actually incur in hours versus a flat fee based on what's the assumed project is going to be. For Danny's estate, her and Grandy B's attorney was named trustee and executor. And so we accepted, they were the person who was accepting it on their behalf, but they charged about $35,000 to $45,000 to administer the estate and play all the roles for her estate, including trustee. For Grandy B's estate, they quoted a fee of $75,000 to $80,000 to support me as trustee and executor for representation, for legal guidance, and all the court filings, asset management, and distribution. I felt that, given that I was named trustee and executor, not them in this estate, and the fact that it was, so much higher, kind of, I didn't understand that. So I asked a lot for clarification. For context, my dad died without a will, and he had a 5-year estate, and his legal fees were ended up being around $120,000 for probate and estate work. And that was, so I felt like for a 9 to 12 month estate administration process with me carrying some of the burden didn't warrant that much of a fee. So my uncle and I decided it would be better for all of us if we interviewed new attorneys and had a fresh start, especially given, the discrepancies of what happened originally. Fast forward a couple of weeks, we finally got a death certificate. So we're only, a couple weeks after her death, and this is everything that's been going on. And we don't even have a death certificate yet. On September 12th, almost a month later, we finally got a death certificate. Typically, it takes 7 to 10 days to get one, but what happened was the doctor signed the wrong date of her death. So I mentioned my grandma had died August 15th. The doctor put in August 16th. So we had to get the whole thing amended, and it was a huge mess. So if you're able to double check those death certificates before they go to the state, I highly recommend it. Later in September, we had a conversation about making sure everything was transparent, open line of communication and education. And that was something that, they wanted, but also I felt was right because of so many beneficiaries and so many stakeholders. And beneficiaries are people who, would receive something from the trust from the estate. Because of so many beneficiaries and so many stakeholders, the only way this is going to go smoothly is if we're all working together, if we're all on the same team, if we're all on the same page. And so I had a conversation with the whole family, going over month by month, potentially what the process would look like and what the distributions would look like and when they can expect it, to set the right expectations that, this isn't going to be done in a month or 3 months. It's going to take a while, and we need to be patient, and it's all going to work better if we're all on the same team. And what came out of that was, a request and for me to send bi-weekly email updates when we accomplish something. So it's so important to keep everyone apprised of progress, to make sure we're moving in the right direction. And it's worth the extra added layer of communication in order to make sure everybody feels comfortable with what's going on. Over the next few months, we transferred her revocable trust to the irrevocable trust. You have to get a new tax ID number because the revocable trust is created with the owner's tax ID number, the grantor's tax ID number. But when somebody dies, you can no longer use their tax ID number. So you have to create an irrevocable trust where the revocable trust goes. And at that point, when somebody dies, you can't make any changes to that irrevocable trust. What's written in the document is there. We closed, I can't even count how many bank accounts, between 6 to 8 bank accounts with different institutions. We paid off and paid off as many of the bills as we possibly could. They're still coming in. It took me a while to, get mail forwarding because one of their neighbors was collecting all the mail for them. And he's in his 90s and he's an amazing guy, super nice, just cared for them so much. And it was just really challenging to go up there and get all the mail, get a pile of mail for the month and come back, open it all up, have all these new tasks. So you have to try to set up mail forwarding to the person who's going to be receiving the mail and doing all these tasks. And finally, probate was opened. And once probate is opened, you notify any potential creditors of her passing, and then they have a certain period of time to file a claim with the estate in order to get paid back if they're owed something by the decedent, by the people who have passed. One other thing that came up was interesting with the IRAs. And so what happened was each of them had IRAs, had retirement accounts. But my grandmother, Grandy B's retirement account, her beneficiary was Danny, and Danny's retirement account, her beneficiary was Grandy B. And they didn't have any contingent beneficiaries. So when Danny died, theoretically, her IRA should have gone to Grandy B. But since both of them, since it happened so fast, we didn't actually make that transfer. And when Grandy B died, since Danny had died, it would have gone to Grandy B's estate as because the estate was a pour over will, and it was to catch everything else that wasn't named with titling or beneficiaries. So what people don't realize is that the will is the last thing that's read. It is titling. So how is it titled? Is it titled in the trust, named in the trust, owned in the trust? Is it titled jointly? Titling goes first, and then beneficiary designation, and then the will. And so it's an interesting concept, but they named each other as beneficiaries with no contingent beneficiaries. Therefore, both of them go to Grandy B's estate, and the estate has to pay taxes once you sell because it's a qualified pre-tax account. And if the estate and potentially given because of the estate, the beneficiaries that actually receive the money may have to pay those taxes. And so that's what we're going through right now is the beneficiaries who are receiving those funds are paying the taxes based on their said distributions. So that becomes taxable to the beneficiaries, something to look out for. I'm still working with one life insurance company. Grandy B's policy, Danny's policy. Grandy B was the beneficiary for one of Danny's policies. She wasn't the full beneficiary, but she was like a 1/4 beneficiary. And because Grandy B is no longer around to receive the claim for Danny's policy, this has been long. That her funds go to the estate, and so that means more paperwork, more checks and balances. Yeah. So overall, I spend around about 3 to 5 hours per week on estate administration, calls, emails, just moving it along and trying to cross one thing off the checklist every single week. It is not the most fun task. I can tell you that right now. It's not like every time I open up my laptop or get an email, I'm excited. I don't dread it just yet, but it's not, something I look forward to working on because I'm working on something for my dead grandmother, and that's really sad and that's really hard and carries a lot of weight and emotion. And so just like if you're, chipping an ice or trying to chop down a tree, you can't just chop the whole thing down at once. You have to make progress. You have to make baby steps and tackle as much as you can on a day-to-day basis if you can do that. With that said, I am honored that my grandmother thought that I was worthy and competent enough to handle such a task and carry out her legacy in this capacity. I think she really felt unaccepted a lot of her life, and I think she felt I always accepted her for who she was, her amazing attributes and her flaws. And I think that ended up being the reason that she chose me was, wasn't, she never felt judged around me. She just felt like I was a good guy, as Danny would say. And I know she was proud of me. And I'm trying to make her proud in this capacity as well. On October 9th, 2025, we had a celebration of life for both Grandy B and Danny. We brought our family together and all of her friends, invited them over to her house to honor their legacy. We had 40 plus people there, although some of the family members couldn't make it. And my job one was to bring the alcohol to the event, but two, to time up the montages. There's like a kitchen TV and a family room TV. And my job was to time up the montages so that both TVs were like going at the same time the same picture was showing so that people could be looking at the same pictures. And I'm happy to announce that I was able to accomplish that mission with the help of my girlfriend, but we were able to, handle that very daunting task. The day was filled with amazing food, laughs, stories, smiles, pictures. And towards the end of the celebration of life, I conducted a family sharing circle, which I'm really proud about. The context of the sharing circle is we went around one by one and shared memories and stories about both Grandy B and Danny to honor their legacy. I heard stories about Christmas and cooking Italian meat sauce with the grandkids. I shared my grandparents' day story and how I viewed them as pioneers and disruptors, as outwardly gay women in society in the 1980s, which could not have been easy. Grandy B, I know you love us so much. I know you and Danny are golfing, making 15, 20, 30-foot putts. I know you're eating dinner as slow as you want together up there in heaven. Happy birthday. I love you so much. Currency of Grief family, thank you for allowing me this space to open up about all that I've been going through with my grandmother over the past year plus, for me to honor her legacy, to honor Danny, to talk about our family a little bit, and to portray some of the lessons that I've learned given this role, responsibility, and experience. I appreciate you all for tuning into this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. Always remember, it's a great day to have a great day. So go have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.